Meet Tim Enwall, a seasoned entrepreneur and 4-time startup CEO with multiple successful exits. Tim's career began at Apple and includes significant roles as the head of strategy at Nest Labs and CEO positions at companies like Tendril, Revolve, and Misty Robotics.
I was so over the moon hooked on this thing called computers. Apple was such a formative component of my story. I want to do this startup thing. I have this thirst to do what Steve and Steve did. Emotionally, you sort of have to be so committed to your startup that it borders on insanity, right? Mm-hmm. Like your friends, your family, often we're going to be looking at you like you're crazy. You're like, yeah, I am, but I'm so convinced that this is a need in society that I am going to deliver it. And yet you can't take that sort of maniacal belief and attach it to who you are. Be really conscious of what you attach to and what validates you.
What are you most proud of, Tim?
Have to pause because I'm emotional. I'm most proud of...
Before we dive into today's episode, designed to inspire your journey towards success, happiness, and fulfillment, I have a small favor to ask of you. Please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. My goal is to continue bringing you insightful and helpful content that will foster your personal and professional growth. I'm so thrilled to have you on this journey with me, and I deeply appreciate your support. Tim, I'm so excited to have you on today's podcast. I know it's been a while since we've caught up, but the listeners don't know who you are. I've known you now for over a decade. So as we kick off, I'd love to learn more about, and just not me, the listeners would love to learn more about your story. Give us, everything from childhood, what influenced you, and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, well, we're not forever, so I'll try to just hit the highlights. I'm a Boulder kid, grew up and raised in Boulder, son of a lawyer, son of a PhD in political science. And my high school girlfriend, her dad worked for IBM, engineer. I had no knowledge or introduction of what the heck engineering was until I met her. And then she applied for a summer camp at CU when we were in high school. For a 1 week, introduction to all the engineering disciplines. And I said to myself, okay, girlfriend, CU week, what could go wrong? So I did that, walked into a digital introduction where we wired up a NAND gate with a counter, and all of a sudden it was counting from 0 to 9 and back. I was like, oh my God, I was hooked. And that was a really, really critical moment for me. At the age of 17 and a half or 18 or whatever, I was so over the moon hooked on this thing called computers. And this was 82. And, so personal computers were 5 years old, and I had a Commodore at home. So, played with that. Got my electrical engineering and computer science degree at Berkeley, was a summer intern at Apple my junior year, commuted down and worked 25 hours a week during my senior year, and then just worked full-time at Apple for 8.5 years, which happened to be pretty much year 1.5 to year 10 of Jobs' exile. So I was there for that period of time where he wasn't. And I left... I married my wife. She also grew up in Boulder. We were great friends in high school. She sort of rebuffed me for 8-10 years until we were 25, and so we wanted to come back to Boulder. So this really crappy period of Apple's existence was happening in 94, 95, right? There were 2 or 3 CEOs in succession, which were basically driving the company into the ground, which is when Steve came back. But I left when the company was being driven into the ground, right? Came back to Boulder with Hillary, sold all my stock, which is obviously one of the most painful things I've ever done, right? Because Steve came back like a year and a half after I left, and started, with the chiclets, and but Apple was such a formative component of my story. An amazing place, a place that prides itself for polishing the underside of the banisters, because they know it's there. Nobody else is going to know, but they know that quality is polishing that underside of the banister. And, working with talented people, computers, it was Apple and Microsoft at that time. So super, super formative. Plus, just Steve and Steve's whole story of, starting with the black box together, and then 100 Apple Ones, and selling them out of the back of his VW van, and, being in the garage with Chris and others. That was so eye-opening to me, because, as a young person in this world where you hear all these brands, you just don't have any real conception that actually companies start in garages, right? They start in somebody's brain, then they talk them out with their friends and people like Steve Wozniak, and all of a sudden, right, you're creating something, and that was eye-opening. So, at Apple, I was just like, okay, I want to start things. I want to do this startup thing. I have this thirst to do what Steve and Steve did. So, back to Boulder, started my first business off the backs of my mortgage, completely self-built, grew it to 50 people. It was in the very beginning of e-commerce, right? I mean, we were working with Netscape version 0.5 and the very first versions of Internet Explorer and e-commerce and early, digital media. So 50 people, 3 continents, sold it to a public company called Gartner.
I've never heard of them.
Yeah. And okay, great. Worked for them for a couple of years. Wanted to start another one. Started a company called Tendril, which was really leveraging the Zigbee standard and, smart homes and Internet of Things. That company was intended to be sort of the software platform, the operating system of this new low power network. That had so many ups and downs. It was wow. I mean, and the company is now worth $1.6 billion. It's called Uplight. So many ups and downs, but a real example of persistence and listening to the market and course correcting. But ultimately, it got into energy efficiency, serving power companies. I left there in 2012. Was a mentor in residence at Techstars, and met the founders of a company called MobiPlug, which we renamed Revolve, which is where I met you, which was also an Internet of Things company, smart home. We had a mobile app and a hub for controlling all the devices in the home, and it was magical. It was so fun, right? Sonos and Philips Hue lights and other light switches and Nest thermostats and other, and being able to walk in with geolocation, and just because it knew you were home, right, turning the lights on and playing your favorite soundtrack, or at night just hitting the scene, a routine, and going to bed, and all the lights went. That was all just magical stuff. And through that process, I was really perfecting, high performing teams. And as right, the Revolve team just loved each other, loved working. It was a magical experience. Yes. So really had learned that through 3 experiences. Sold it to Google. Google had bought Nest and was expanding in this whole domain of smart homes. And so sold that to Google, stayed there a couple years, then went into the world of robotics. The CEO of Sphero called me and said, "Hey, the founder of Sphero has invented this, really awesome personal robot, and we want to spin it out. Do you want to take a look?" I did. Loved it. Really felt and still feel that robots will be part of our lives.
Oh yes,
right? They'll be in our businesses. They'll be around our homes. They'll be helpers in a lot of different ways, and there are too many use cases or applications for a robot for one company to sort of build the hardware and the operating system for the robot and all the use cases, right? So we built a programmable robot, the Misty 2. Just such a phenomenal product that, ultimately is probably 10 years too early, right? The technology just wasn't capable. Whether it was the language technology, the visual sight technology and recognition, the navigating in the home and being able to do that flawlessly for a price point that was accessible. And each of my first 3 businesses was financially very successful. This wasn't financially very successful. We ended up 2.5 years, almost 3 years ago, selling it to another personal robotics company called Furhat. And they're still rocking and rolling with lower volumes, buying the time to have the technology catch up. Things like ChatGPT 4.0 that just came out, right? Phenomenal, right? If we could have put that in a Misty robot,
yeah,
we're like, okay, now we're starting to get there. But that was 3 years ago, and so finally, right as that was happening, your friend, my friend, colleague from Revolve, Matt, who was our cloud architect, contacted me and said, hey, my team of 10 people at Microsoft has figured out a new paradigm for cloud computing that is dramatically faster, scale to zero, more secure, ultimately far more productive in terms of utilization of CPUs, and therefore far more green and energy sustainable. And we're going to spin out. So I said, hey, why don't I help you? You're CEO. I can do a lot of the company building stuff. The product, the market. Let me help you. So I've been doing that for 3 years.
Going through what you've been through, do you often come across businesses where definitively this one's going to be successful or this one has no chance, or maybe is there like certain buckets or that you just kind of know right off the bat, or like how do you make that decision, or is that something easy for you to, I guess, to?
If it was easy for me, I'd be a great investor. I learned after selling my first business when we had a decent amount of capital that I am the world's worst seed investor. Okay. The world's worst angel investor. Because as an entrepreneur, you have this optimism, you have this enthusiasm. And when somebody comes at you with optimism, enthusiasm, like you just sort of emotionally just sort of chug along with it.
Sure.
And what venture capitalists and capital allocators do really well is they're able to sort of really dispassionately look at things. And so, I lost, I think my first 8 bets, and then finally said, okay, this Techstars thing in year 1 or 2, they've got a venture fund. Maybe I should put my money there, which turned out to be an amazing decision. We were investors in Uber and and SendGrid and Twilio and all kinds of stuff. I mean, like first round investors in those companies. So I mean, to answer your question, at this point, yeah, I mean, I've got a similar rubric to any venture capitalist. Is the product such that it's going to fly off the shelf? Does the team have the experience and the passion to do it? Is the business model there such that there's a mechanism to drive cash into the business? What's the competitive landscape look like? So it's easier for me to look at a lot of businesses and just say, yeah, I wouldn't invest my money in that or my time. On the success side, there's so many things that have to go right. I mean, Fermion, from day one, I was relatively convinced that this company was going to be and is going to be phenomenally successful, because cloud compute is the utility of the 21st century. Now with AI, it's just like being supercharged, and we've invented a third lighter weight, higher capacity, and higher utilization method to do cloud computing. Like, yeah, right. So are there obstacles? Of course. Like, it's just, from this from a marketing perspective, getting awareness, getting attention, getting interest, and then converting that into sales it's just so hard, right?
Yes.
So it's not just the concept. It's not just that there is a market and you have a product. I mean, product execution is a thing. Can you actually execute the product to the market, and can you deliver it repeatedly fast enough? And can you execute marketing? And so you can see a lot of great concepts that you're like, yeah, if well executed, that's going to be phenomenal. Right. But I don't know, 90% of all, can't execute.
Yeah. So that's always a tough thing. The analogy I always use with that, because I'm in the thick of training for a half marathon right now, and it's sort of, I want to finish at this time. That's very possible. But what is the probability of that really happening? Really comes down to me and my ability to execute.
Yeah.
And when you put that in the lens of an entire organization or company, it's a totally different ballgame. So for you, how do you prioritize what is most important that a company should focus on, and then getting cultural buy-in on that?
There's no question. Product market fit. I gave a talk in Paris, and my first bullet point, right? It was 5 lessons from 25 years of entrepreneurship. My first bullet point was product market fit. If you aren't spending 66 to 80% of your time on product market fit, stop, right? And there's this wonderful article by Andreessen called Market Annealing, Product Market Fit, Market Annealing. And they talk about, the process of annealing a metal is sort of heating it and pounding it and heating it and pounding it and getting it to be sort of this proper balance. And that's so apt, that analogy, because you have a product conception that you start with, and of course you're talking to your market and saying, hey, if I bring this to you, what do you think? And your market's giving you some positive feedback, but it's not until you are asking people for money, right, that the rubber's hitting the road. And do I actually have something that is attractive? I love this phrase, does your product fly off the shelf? And if you think about what it takes for something to fly off the shelf, 3 conditions have to be clear. The problem has to be significant enough in the customer's mind that they need to solve it. The solution has to be the best fit solution. And the pricing has to be accessible. If those 3 things are happening, then your product is going to fly off the shelf. And it takes a lot of time of in being in the market, interacting with the market at trade shows or meetings or Zoom calls or wherever. And it takes obviously a lot of time to construct the product and to make sure that you're devoting your resources to the most important capability of the product first, and the second most important capability of the product third, and second, right? So you have to pay so much attention to that. And there's this thing, and you know this because you run a business. The leader of a business is bombarded on all sides, right? Legal and finance and HR and human beings and the marketplace and sales, right? It's so easy to allow yourself to just get pinged sort of to death.
Right.
And so you have to focus on product market fit.
That's amazing. Another thing, I did read that article, and another thing you talked about too is, this is your background. You're in the tech startup scene. You talked about prolonging, the phase of raising money as long as you possibly can. And, for those who didn't read the article, elaborate on that, because I do think we're in a world now where it's so important. Yes. And it's crazy because we have an influx of content creators, Gen Zers, younger millennials, who instead of working a 9-to-5 or being a part of this fun tech startup craze that I was a part of, over a decade ago, they're like, why don't I just talk about what interests me the most, pump out some videos, and now I'm getting brand sponsorships, and I'm making more than I'll ever make at a 9-to-5.
Exactly.
And it's less stress, and I do it on my time, and it's encompassed around my lifestyle. So back to the prolong the whole, investing aspect as long as you can.
Yeah. So that was really the point too in that talk in Paris. Venture capital is a relatively modern phenomenon, right? It's like in the maybe in the 60s, but mostly in the 70s, right? Especially around the personal computer revolution and then other tech. Businesses have almost always been between the founder and the customer, and the customer is funding your business, right? Hey, I am delivering something that you, the customer, find valuable, and you're going to reach into your wallet and you're going to give me money. That's the way a business should work. Venture came along and basically just said, hey, can we accelerate this? And it's an abnormal situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is absolutely, I don't know, the word that's coming to mind is bastardization, but that's not the right word, right? It's an anomaly. Firstly, so it distracts founders from the essence,
Got it.
right? Which is, I need to reach into your wallet and get money from you. That is the essence, right? And with venture capital, it sort of distracts you to lull you that you have some time to do that, right? Oh, well, I have to develop a product, and it's going to take me capital to develop a product, which for quite a while was sort of true. But now there's this thing called AI, and there's this thing called globalization. And so as a founder, you don't actually have to have coders anymore, right?
Yeah.
You can go to some of these tools, or you can go to a coder in India or Romania, and all of a sudden your labor is a tenth of what your labor would be in the United States, and you've got these tools. So for very little money, you can get a product out there, right? That somebody is ready to now pay you for because it meets a need. And so you're then in so much more of a power position because you've got customers and you've got cash flow and you've got proof points, so that you can then decide, do I want cash to accelerate my growth? And that's really where you want to go get venture capital. And you're going to give up far less of your business in that equation. And then the third part of it is, man, the venture industry is changing radically right now. You had this 12, 14-year period of zero interest rates where cash was just streaming into startups of all flavors. The latest research from PitchBook's like the amount of inflow from limited partners to venture for the next 4 or 5 years is going to grow at like 2.9% a year. That's crazy low. And by the way, those inflows are down something like 40 or 50% from 2 or 3 years ago. So venture firms are going to go out of business, right? It's crazy. So you've got both of these trends, right? You've got this, I can be a self-made tech founder with AI and offshore labor and other things by going direct, and the capital's probably not there anyway.
Yeah.
So like that, that's why I really talked about that in Paris, because you really don't want to think about venture capital at this point, because it's going to be hard to get.
Yeah. As you've gone through the successes and failures throughout your career, how did you recover or pick yourself back up during like the failure part? Because I think when you're writing on success, it's a whole different kind of feeling and emotion and the dopamine effect of it. But then it's in the process that you meet a lot of failures and missteps, and you're trying to figure it all out before you hit success. And then sometimes you go through the process and it's like, it's just not going to work out. How have you emotionally like coped with that? And do you have like specific key points or advice that you would offer anybody who's maybe going through the same thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start there. That I just had this conversation with a person I'm mentoring last night. The thing I would wish, and I wished on this person, is you can't take it personal. You can't internalize the down periods or those moments of failure or those moments where things just aren't going. You can't internalize that about yourself, about your identity, about your essence, because 99% of all these things fail, right? And holy cow, I mean, I shared my story, and my fourth startup, like you'd think after 20 years, I'd know something about this stuff, right? But that was my biggest failure. I mean, my biggest failure by far. I burned through more capital than I raised in the first three, and it was purely because we had completely misunderstood the mixture of technology to the marketplace and the price, right? So talk about flying off the shelf, like we sort of missed on all three.
Right.
So you can't connect it to your identity. It's like, this is just the thing I'm doing. And there's this like really subtle balance there, because emotionally you sort of have to be so committed to your startup that it borders on insanity, right? Like your friends, your family often are going to be looking at you like you're crazy. You're like, yeah, I am. But I'm so convinced that this is a need in society that I am going to deliver it. And yet you can't take that sort of maniacal belief and attach it to who you are, right? It's just, no. This is this belief for this moment in time, this place I'm spending my effort.
Yeah.
That's the biggest piece. And, failure is just a part of the ride. Interestingly, my first business sold for, a good return. And most people would say, that was a phenomenal success. I walked away from that with some sadness, because there's some attachment to your business and now it's over. And, but also, I was a real jerk. The culture of Apple, there's so many smart people, and the culture of Apple, the one that I was part of, it was just prove who was the smartest person in the room. And it was just like all this, always, proving who was the smartest person in the room and cutting people down. And so I had a lot of that in me as a leader in my first business. I was like, well, man, that was terrible. I don't want to be that asshole. And that's really where my journey into high performing teams started, was a result of, I need to be a different leader the next time I do this.
I love that.
And then Tendril went through, 2 or 3 or 4 layoffs. I mean, I wrote the S1 to go public. We were meeting with bankers, Goldman and Morgan Stanley. I wrote the S1 because we had all these pilots with all these utility companies in America, represented like 80% of American population. And like, wow, we thought, there you go. Turns out those were all pilot projects, and none of those power companies had any intention of going beyond pilot. Geez.
Okay.
And so, what do you do with a 250 person company that all of a sudden learns that there's no real business there? Oh, well, first of all, you course correct dramatically, and you lay off people. And that's when I left and worked with Revolve. And perseverance and working through that course correction. Okay, great. They aren't going to buy that. What will they buy? Oh, they'll buy this energy efficiency, data science, machine learning. Great. And off to the races. And now, again, worth more than $1.6 billion.
Yeah. What made you realize, what was the pivotal moment that made you realize, wow, I'm kind of an asshole and I need to figure this out in myself so that I can be a better leader moving forward?
I think it was just the decay of some of the relationships in my first business.
Okay.
That I, thought were on a certain level and just turned out not to be true. And also and it was just some self-reflection too, a lot after getting some distance from it. So I turned to a coach, Adam Reynolds, who I've worked with now repeatedly, and really wanted to learn and be a different type of leader.
Yeah. So I remember when I was recruited to work at Revolve, and when you're in the tech startup scene in Boulder, for those who don't know that are listening, a lot of the founders and CEOs out there that are, funded by the same venture VC firm, in this case it was Foundry Group, they all know each other. And I was at another startup at that time, and much of the sort of warning or advice I was given was, Tim's a really hard CEO to work for. Like you really need to make sure you have everything in line. And there was a part of me that was kind of like, oh, well, that's intimidating. But then the larger part of me has sort of always been I will jump off before anybody else does. And I thought, if I'm going to work with somebody who's going to push me out of my comfort zone and make me feel a little scared, I was like, why wouldn't I do that? I want to grow. And when I met you, it was it was not the persona that everybody was telling me about. You were the first CEO I've ever worked for that actually cared about the people in the company. And that was awesome. And I always get a little emotional talking about that because it was a huge deal. I came in the time period where I'd graduated college and was working. I think the whole industry of corporation of working for somebody was always like, why should we hire you? And now it's totally flipped. It's more of, why should I work for you? But I think you were ahead of the game, because I remember sitting in an interview with you and you're like, list off all the things that you think that you want in a team. And I think we got to like 15 and you're like, what else? And I was just like, oh shit, I don't know. But it was amazing. And then you had, a coach that was on board with us too, that team members could talk to if they were dealing with any sort of conflict, which was so healthy, so ahead of your time. And I feel like you should walk people through this process a little bit, because I think it really built like such a positive experience. And I'm so thankful I experienced it at such a young age, because it made me recognize and realize relationships are so, so valuable to the success of your life, both personally and professionally. Yeah. So that whole program is a big thing. I mean, it's not like you just like woke up one day and said, we're going to do this. I mean, it was well thought out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it had started at Tendril.
Okay.
So, at Tendril, we had an opportunity to get a company making deal with a large power company in Houston. And to do that, we were going to have to deliver a couple pieces of hardware and some software in like 9 months, grow our team simultaneously. I was like, wow, how do you do that? Well, you're going to have everybody rowing in the same direction. You're going to have a lot of high performance. How are we going to do that? And I brought in Tom Stites, who had taken the U.S. Nordic team from worst in the world to best in the world at the Olympics. And he sort of taught the beginnings of this. And the essence of it starts with Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And Google subsequently has studied all of their high-performing teams and their non-high-performing teams, and in a Project Aristotle. So you can Google that and read all about it. Essentially, Google empirically proved what Patrick was outlining theoretically about the dimensions of a high-performing team. And Tom started, Tom taught that. And what Patrick doesn't cover, what Tom didn't really cover, that from my experiences in a couple of businesses, I have found to be so substantial, is both Lencioni and Google start with trust, right? Google calls it psychological safety. Lencioni calls it trust. And both of them essentially says, oh, well, assume that your organization has trust and psychological safety. And then you can build from there, right, into healthy conflict and accountability and results orientation and mission. And like, okay, well, trust is a pretty hard thing. Psychological safety is a pretty hard thing to create, right? Well, what's that? That is relationship. That is all about a human being's ability to build, to create, build, maintain, foster, improve relationship. And so when we interviewed you or anybody else in Revolve, we were looking for, is this person a person who is self-aware enough of themselves that they're going to take accountability and ownership of their part of a relationship in the process of relationship building, or not? And is team orientation so important to them, or is self-orientation so important to them, right? And that's what we screen for. Because then you have the ingredients of people who are, when they get into a conflict situation, their first inclination is not going to be to point the finger that I'm the victim and you're perpetrating on me. their first inclination can be, I must have done something wrong there, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to own that because I own relationship as much as that person does, and I'm going to make this right. And those are all the ingredients. And so, coming back to what you first talked about, yeah, I'm an intense person. Yes, I have high standards. And yeah, I want, every business sort of needs some of that. And that was the flip for me from company one to company two, was the recognition that relationship mattered. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, another really influential book for me was Maxwell's How Successful People Lead. Mm-hmm. Because it talks about, level one is just you're handed a title and you think that you're leading because you have a title. Wrong, right? Nobody's following you because you have a title. Level two is relational, right? They're following because you're in relationship. Number three is results, right? Because you have relationship and you're getting results, people are really following you. So I really worked with my coaches on how do I become a better person to build better relationships.
Yeah, I love that. I think that truly influenced me so much that when after Revolve was acquired, and your advice was just run your company, Sue, like the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have to get another job if it fails. And relationships have been the biggest driver for financial success of my business. Mm-hmm. People just want to work with you because they like you, they trust you, and they have fun.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's pretty simple. And that's the thing is, it's no different than when you're trying to find somebody to buy or purchase your product, your services. How relatable is your brand? How relatable are the people behind it? Are you just transactional, or are you really trying to build a relationship with the people who are going to fund you're trying to sell?
Are you authentic? Are you caring? Are you in service? Are you accountable to your, for your actions? All that.
Yeah. What are you most proud of, Tim?
Have to pause because I'm emotional. I'm most proud of people like you and people like Matt and people like Miles from Misty, who have taken the experiences that they had and have gone on to build businesses with the sort of philosophies and principles that they resonated with. That's what I'm most proud of, and insanely proud when I hear, you or other people from Revolve saying we'll never have a work experience like that again, or Misty saying that was the best place I've ever worked. I'm not going to have an experience like that again. That's what fulfills me. That's what brings me joy. That's what brings me pride is that when we can make all of the conditions for people to just be insanely happy and fulfilled with their work. It doesn't mean that every moment is, nirvana, right? But even the process of striving and the process of conflict and getting through conflict and getting through conflict healthfully, right? That's energizing and it's fulfilling.
Yeah. And the other thing too is up until I joined Revolve, all I cared about was how much money am I going to make? Because I'm in my 20s. That's all that I cared about. And it shifted. It was just making money is great, but it's fleeting. You're not going to feel happier. You're not going to feel more fulfilled. You have to have solid relationships that are there with you through certain phases and chapters of your life, both personally and professionally. And I think that's so important is when you and I, we don't see each other often, but we see each other once or twice a year. And when we do, we pick up where we left off, which is rare. Yeah. And it's not awkward. And we can have dinners with each other's spouses. It's we do double dates. It's great. I think I saw an interview a long time ago. I watched it, I think right before or around the time I joined Revolve, but you talked about how in your younger days, you cared most about, making money as well. And then that totally shifted for you too. Can you walk me through that process? Like, when did that shift for you where you were like, money does not make me happier?
Probably when I made quite a bit of money from selling my first business. Which is somewhat hypocritical, right? That, once, and it's certainly, it's certainly a sort of white male privilege kind of thing. But I think it really was in that transition where we're realizing, and Steve said it, and it's really trite, but it's the journey is the reward, and it really is about all those moments and all those times with the people that you work with, because ultimately, when you devote yourself to healthy relationships and healthy conflict and building trust and psychological safety and avoiding being the victim and the perpetrator, when you devote yourself to all that, you just end up, I think, being a happier individual, right? And so that just seems like that's sort of the essence of life, and money is a necessary component of safety, right?
Sure.
But not necessarily the most emotionally satisfying.
Yeah. You said something there, you touched on relationships again, and I think that translates also to, it makes me think of that 75-year happiness study that was done by Harvard. And at the end of these people's lives, they talked a lot about, they never talked about their job. They never defined success as like money, career, how many hours I was in the office. It was all centered around the quality of the relationships in their lives, first and foremost.
Yep.
And secondary to that was not caring what other people thought of them. And that second point, I do love that about you. I think you carry a level of confidence. You kind of have to be a little not cocky. You're not arrogant. You're very confident in your ability to execute, to be a visionary, but then also execute on that vision. Where did that come from? Did you always had it as like a little kid?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I've really almost never cared. I can't really think of a time when I really cared what people thought of me.
Yeah.
Like if you go back to my high school yearbook, I wore the same sweatshirt. It was my mom's sorority sweatshirt for 2 years, every day. like
this is
like,
amazing.
I
did
don't-
not know that.
Like, do not care, when I show up looking however I look, do not, my friends, another just funny one. I cut my hair every 2 months. I'm sort of there's an OCD to me. Every 2 months on the first of the month, and that goes for my ear hair. And my friends that I've all known, I've got this group of friends from Boulder, 12, 14, that we've known each other for now, 50 years. And they'll just come over and pull my ear hair and just be like razzing me so much. That's gone on for like 30 years. Like, okay, whatever. And, you might know this from some of the work we did at Revolve, but I entered the world incredibly myopic from an eye geometry, like the worst myopia that any of my eye doctors have dealt with in any of their patients, which meant that my focal point was the tip of my nose, meant I didn't have contact with the outside world.
Yeah.
I didn't have visual contact with the outside world. So I am, a lot of people might call that egotistic, narcissistic. I am self-referenced. I am very internal. And that's probably where it came from. That I didn't have a conception of an outside world. And so I was just in my bubble I didn't have sight. I didn't have, glasses until I was 2.5 or 3.
Oh my gosh.
Like more than half of my really important development happened in that manner. So, I probably just, I have a real hard time picking up on facial cues and body cues and all that kind of stuff for all those reasons. So it's harder for me to build relationships.
Interesting.
And I think that's probably another reason.
Yeah. See, I would have never thought that of you, because I think of how we've like just stayed in touch throughout the years. It's just been very authentic. And we can talk about business. We can talk about kids. We can talk about all the other shit that's happening in our lives, which is amazing. You know, as we look at wrapping up this podcast, what is one piece of advice that you would leave listeners with? And it could be around business, could be personal, anything.
Be really conscious of what you attach to and what validates you. Because when you attach to surface things, I think you can get really emotional easily and be taken off kilter easily. And I've learned over time, I've spent a lot of time on attachment, learned over time what I work hard all the time to attach myself to is I want to be a good person to my friends, and I want to be a good dad and a good husband. And that is it. Meaning, right, I want to be a good person. I don't want to be attached to my business. I don't want to be attached to my house. I don't want to be attached to, being well-read. I don't want to be attached to any of that. And this other one, what validates you? How do you get validation? That's a really important question to periodically come and look at, because again, like when you're really externally validated, it's really easy to be thrown off kilter and off balance, because the external world acts in all kinds of ways that are in their own interests, and you create meaning out of it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, my validation is being attacked, right? And my friend Adam helped me with this. What validates me is that the people I work with appreciate the principles and the teachings, and they go forward.
Yeah.
So
I love
I
that.
think those two things. Yeah.
I love it so much because it resonates with me to the extent that understanding what validated me came down to really loving myself and accepting myself for who I am, and being okay with not living up to other people's standards, because I think that has helped me be so much more peaceful in my mind and not lead with my ego. And instead I'm leading from a place of pure authenticity.
Right.
And intentional. I'm very intentional with everything I do. Everything I spend my time on, it's very intentional. It's not to please anybody. So that's perfect. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah. Awesome.